This is a cable landing station in Marseille, France. From the outside, it appears nondescript, but underneath the surface, it connects to a vast data network comprising 95% of the world's overseas internet traffic. As of 2021, the Marseille FOSS facility connects to 16 major undersea cables, serving areas as diverse as Hong Kong, Singapore, India, Oman, Egypt, Greece, Britain, Portugal, Nigeria, and South Africa. Worldwide, there are over 1,400 landing sites like Marseille FOSS, connecting some 500 active and planned cables. In total, the global network spans 1.4 million kilometers, roughly the sun's diameter. And even though the network provides seamless internet traffic across the globe, the supply, installation, and maintenance of these cables are dominated by a handful of companies from the United States, France, Japan, and more recently, China. More than $10 trillion worth of financial transactions are transmitted via these cables every single day. Everything from Netflix programs to YouTube videos, top secret diplomatic cables, and military orders passes through this undersea network. No wonder the cable infrastructure is a geopolitical imperative. Now, China and America are leveraging every instrument of statecraft available to wrest control and set the power parity for the 21st century. From military might to intelligence gathering, economic warfare, and domestic and international law, nothing is off the table. Because when looking for expedient outcomes, ruthlessness is as good as stratagem. Today's video is sponsored by War Thunder, the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. War Thunder is available on PC, PlayStation, and Xbox, and in crossplay between the platforms with no purchase necessary, just download and play. The game has an arsenal of more than 2,000 historically accurate tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from the 1920s to the present day. What I enjoy most about it is the way the combined arms is played out with air, ground, and naval vehicles interacting with one another. Every vehicle is incredibly detailed, which adds to the game's immersive combat experience. All this powered by incredible graphics and detail in 4K resolution, backed by great music, sound effects, and realistic physics. Best of all, it's free. So play War Thunder now, using the link on the screen. Upon registration, you will get a large, free bonus pack that includes multiple premium vehicles, premium account, boosters, and much more. In June 2017, Australia's Foreign Intelligence Chief Nick Warner flew to Honiara, Solomon Islands. Since 2003, Canberra had occupied the country under the post-9/11 rationale that it was a failed state needing stabilization. Australian security personnel took over policing and other crucial government functions. Warner had previously led that intervention, and with Australia's mission drawing to a close, he now sought to wrap up one final order of business. Upon arrival, Warner met with Solomon's Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare to discuss a new 4,500-kilometer fiber optic cable connecting Honiara to Sydney. The project was seen as a vital development initiative, and it had initially attracted Western support, including backing from the Asian Development Bank. But the plan hit a snag when Sogavare awarded the contract to a Chinese firm, Huawei Marine, provoking anxiety in Canberra. The reason was that in 2013, the Edward Snowden leaks revealed that American hardware, similar to Huawei's, was being rigged to transmit surveillance data to the NSA. Western intelligence agencies were worried Beijing would do the same thing. Soon after meeting with Warner, Sogavare was deposed in a no-confidence vote amid allegations of corruption and bribery. Upon returning to the premiership in 2019, he sought closer security ties with Beijing. But not before his replacement, former World Bank official Rick Howe, dropped Huawei as a contractor, allowing Australia to step in and take control. This incident mostly forgotten nowadays, was an early shot in a war over the world's data infrastructure. Submarine cables make the world what it is today, but their vulnerability stems from their design. The cables are surprisingly thin, roughly the thickness of a garden hose, and they come in various designs, components, and materials. The most basic anatomy has an outermost layer made of polypropylene plastic yarn for insulation, followed by braided steel wires for protective armor. Further inside is a layer of polyethylene plastic for waterproofing, followed by more steel wires and even more polyethylene plastic. About mid-center through the cable is a copper or aluminum tube that protects the cable from damage and corrosion. This is then followed by a water-blocking tape that wraps around the entirety of the cable. Finally, at the innermost layer are the hair-like optical fibers. These are separated and held in place by a fiberglass core. The optical fibers, meanwhile, fire laser signals to receptors on the other end. However, the signal loses integrity when employed over long distances. So, a repeater device is placed every 60-70 kilometers to boost the signal. Some experts claim repeaters can be rigged for surveillance during manufacturing or maintenance. Others claim the cables can easily be monitored at coastal landing stations, presenting a surveillance goldmine for spy agencies. Moreover, submarine cables are laid by special-purpose vehicles. There are around 50 ships worldwide that are capable of laying and maintaining submarine cables. Ergo, the cable business is one of tremendous niche. Sometimes the available expertise is so sparse that governments will turn to rival powers to repair their infrastructure. This applies to medium-sized powers as well as geopolitical juggernauts. Chinese engineers have worked on cables owned by American firms and vice versa. So, there is always some risk when outsourcing maintenance to others. Devices can be installed to capture or corrupt data, which would turn the cable into a liability. The upshot is that every new cable is a geopolitical gambit. New connections forge and strengthen security ties. Exclusion cuts a state out of the loop. For better or worse, this is how data is transmitted across the globe and why submarine cables are worth fighting for. Satellites, by contrast, carry far less data and are much more expensive to launch and maintain. While the tech may mature in the future, as of 2023, satellites account for a tiny fraction of intercontinental data and will likely stay that way in the coming decades. Nevertheless, there is growing anxiety about the espionage and sabotage vulnerability of submarine cables, which is making governments more protective of their territorial waters. Some nations mandate that only certain companies can lay and maintain submarine cables within their exclusive economic zones. But the stakes weren't always so high. In earlier times, data cables were often financed by state enterprises. In the 2000s, circumstances began to change. Chinese telecom companies like Huawei expanded into underserved markets like Papua New Guinea and the Caribbean. A decade later, Chinese telecoms champions carved out their own niche in the cable business. By 2015, China launched the Digital Silk Road to expand its network, partnering with Huawei Marine. In just 4 years, it had captured 15% of the global market. For America, this was a wake-up call. The Trump administration escalated its rhetoric against Beijing. Submarine cables, by their nature, erase the public-private distinction. This then makes the industry a target for both national security and economic protection. Washington not only tightened its grip on the cable network, but also aimed to ensure American firms dominated the market. This is because once in place, cable operators can collect toll booth charges by selling bandwidth or leasing capacity to tech companies, ISPs, and other firms, often for several decades at a time. Cables connecting to developing countries can also crack open new markets, increasing the reach of American tech giants along with the American state's surveillance capabilities. For this reason, government and business act in concert. The former often takes on the high startup costs to ensure cable contracts go to American firms, not their competitors. By teaming up with the federal government, Silicon Valley behemoths muscled in on the cable business. Since 2016, Google, Meta, and Microsoft have invested $2 billion in cables, 15% of the global total, with another $4 billion projected over the next 3 years. These companies also account for 2/3 of global bandwidth use. So, by controlling their own infrastructure, big tech firms also enhance their hold on the industry. As a result, Chinese cable suppliers saw contract offers dry up. Washington's threat of sanctions prompted both Global Marine and Huawei to sell their stakes in their joint venture to Hengtong Group, who rebranded it HMN Tech. The damage, however, had largely been done. Nowadays, HMN Tech has only 2 projects in development, both limited to Southeast Asia and set to come online by 2025. American policymaking thus succeeded in preventing the Chinese from becoming a major stakeholder in the global submarine cable market, at least so far. HMN Tech accounts for only 10% of known existing and planned cable networks. That is substantially lower than that of French manufacturer ASN and American supplier Subcom, which account for 41% and 21% of the global cable market, respectively. But while America dominates the cable planning phase, China, it seems, is more prominent in the maintenance business. Outages, by definition, are unplanned. Repair work often falls into the lap of whomever is capable, available, and nearby. For this reason, to keep a foothold in submarine cable operations, China has hedged its bet in the maintenance business, tending to the dense cable infrastructure in its nearby seas, including American and Japanese lines. Some analysts claim that this provides opportunities for tapping. In 2022, Chinese ships repaired cables operated by AT&T, Verizon, and Microsoft in the East China Sea. The following May, Microsoft alleged with moderate confidence that state-backed actors hacked into its telecoms infrastructure. Beijing denied any link to the hackers. Partly for this reason, Washington has sought to keep new cables physically distant from China. The Clean Network Initiative, founded in 2020, effectively prohibits direct connections between America and the Chinese mainland. The results speak for themselves. The Bifrost and Echo submarine cables, scheduled to open in 2024, bypass disputed waters near China, as does the Apricot cable, a 12,000-kilometer project connecting to the Philippines and Indonesia, due for completion in 2025. In the Southwest Pacific, however, geopolitical factors are even more pronounced. In 2021, the World Bank scrapped a cable project connecting Guam to Micronesia, Kiribati, and Nauru, which Chinese HMN Tech was favored to win. Washington had essentially scuppered the project. In 2020, the State Department contacted Micronesia, expressing disapproval of Chinese involvement. Thereafter, Washington, Tokyo, and Canberra announced they were funding a new cable along the same route. By June 2023, the $95 million, 2,250-kilometer project was underway. In turn, this enhanced the status of Guam, a highly militarized overseas U.S. territory, as a major data hub. Hostility between America and China pushes companies to forge new routes along which to send data traffic. As national security and data security are prioritized, policy and regulatory frameworks are put in place that fully exclude hostile vendors from the entire ICT ecosystem. Singapore, Indonesia, the Philippines, and the U.S. island territory of Guam are now emerging as a hub for international data traffic. But competition also extends into the Indian Ocean. Here, a major friction point has been the CME 6 cable running from Singapore to Paris. Initially, Chinese HMN Tech was favored to build it. The company's bid was by far the most competitive. At $500 million, it was only 1/3 of the asking price, and the project was expected to raise HMN Tech's international prestige. Once more, though, Washington stepped in and implied to slap sanctions on the project. Predictably, this resulted in an about-face. The project was handed to Subcom, a New Jersey firm with deep links to US intelligence. Subcom itself started life in 1955 as a Cold War project to enhance American anti-submarine capabilities. Nowadays, it develops cables for companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Meta platforms. Strategically, though, its most important role is as the exclusive contractor for the US military, which it assists in monitoring the PLA Navy. Subcom is also in pole position to lay a new cable to Diego Garcia. The British-administered atoll hosts a 3,000-strong Anglo-American naval base. Its central location allows Washington to project power over vital sea lanes connecting West Asian oil producers with East Asian oil importers. Nowadays, the island serves not just as a naval base, but as a data nexus for the Five Eyes intelligence sharing network, which connects the intelligence agencies of the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Beijing's activity, on the other hand, is more modest. Chinese investment in the Indian Ocean mostly pertains to cables predating the crackdown on its technology firms. China Mobile was instrumental in bringing about the Two Africa cable, a line connecting Africa to Europe. Meanwhile, China Unicom was a key investor in the Sail cable, a 5,800-kilometer cable connecting Brazil with Cameroon, which went live in 2020. Nevertheless, few Chinese-based submarine cables have reached the West in recent years. One rare exception is the Peace Cable. Going live in December 2022, the 12,000-kilometer line connects Singapore, Kenya, and Pakistan to France, crossing through Egypt and Malta. The cable was entirely financed and built by Chinese companies, including HMN Tech. France gave the project the go-ahead because it wanted to create strategic autonomy for itself at a time of increased hostility between America and China. Over time, though, the bifurcation of submarine cables into separate networks will enhance their appeal as a military target. And while some states, like Ukraine, have attempted to sidestep threats to physical infrastructures via satellite internet, these measures cannot replace submarine cables, at least not in the coming decades. What makes conflict over subsea cables especially dangerous is the fact it is nearly impossible to distinguish between accident and willful interference. Worse, geopolitical hotspots like the South China Sea are commercial hubs with dense undersea infrastructures. Anchors and fishing nets regularly cause outages, as do natural phenomena like landslides and earthquakes. All this leaves ample scope for misunderstanding and miscalculation. In early 2023, for instance, residents of the Taipei-administered Matsu Islands experienced an internet outage. Within a week, the two main cables connecting the islands to Taiwan were cut. Residents suspected Beijing, but they soon acknowledged that there was no direct evidence of Chinese involvement, much less intent. One of the problems with submarine cables is that international law concerning the infrastructure is underdeveloped and somewhat outdated. The United States and China have tried to fill the gaps with their own regulations. However, both their efforts have been lacking, albeit for different reasons. American laws are too old. The most recent American statute covering subsea cables is the Submarine Cable Act of 1888. Breaking a cable attracts a $5,000 fine and up to 2 years imprisonment. Meanwhile, negligently dropping anchors or fishing nets leads to a $500 fine and 3 months confinement. Scant deterrence for an act that generates repair bills of up to $3 million. Chinese law, meanwhile, is inconsistently enforced. Beijing imposes penalties based on the degree of interference. Intentional or negligent cable damage brings a $1,400 fine, but operators can also be ordered to cease activity. Laying unauthorized cables also attracts a $28,000 fine. But lax enforcement means China averages 26 annual cable defects, the most of any state. This has precipitated a recent crackdown on activities like sand mining, drilling, anchoring, and bottom trawling. Ships suspected of breaking military cables have also been seized. China insists that the right to delineate cable routes across continental shelves rests with the coastal state. In practice, this means notifying the State Oceanic Administration and obtaining a letter of non-objection from the PLA Navy, sometimes resulting in rerouting. Only then can an operator apply for permission to land their cables on Chinese territory. Thereafter, they must keep maritime authorities fully informed of their activities. Yet, this stance will likely cause friction, especially since Beijing argues that operators working within the 9-dash line, a purportedly historical claim to nearly the entire South China Sea, must seek its consent. Both Beijing and Taipei claim Chinese sovereignty over the sea, notwithstanding a 2016 judgment at the Permanent Court of Arbitration finding it unlawful. Washington's permitting process is likewise complex. Operators seeking to work stateside must get permission from the FCC, the Committee for the Assessment of Foreign Participation in the United States, the Army Corps of Engineers, and possibly state and local authorities. This red tape can delay approval by 2 years, a time span that will only increase if a new bill restricting American cable technology sharing becomes regulation. Laws are like sausages. It's better not to see them being made. By issuing strict permitting requirements, both Beijing and Washington run afoul of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. And while China has ratified the convention and the US observes it as customary international law, both nations' permitting requirements contravene the law of the sea. Article 79, for instance, clearly states that all nations have the right to lay submarine cables on the continental shelf. Article 112 goes even further and includes the high seas beyond the continental shelf. That said, there are genuine shortfalls in the law of the sea framework. Protections for submarine cables are lacking. The convention does not criminalize attacks on cables in international waters, nor does it oblige states to protect cables in their territorial seas. If these concerns are not addressed universally, each state will address them individually. That is a recipe for conflict. Submarine cables are the world's information pipelines, and as such, they are becoming a major front in the new Cold War between China and America. Infrastructures laid today are consolidating the power blocks of tomorrow with implications for commerce, strategic policy, and international law. While the West retains the lead for now, China's growing stature and the rise of South-South cooperation via BRICS and other fora could open up new axes of collaboration. Whatever happens, promoting and protecting cable projects is now a geopolitical imperative. Because while control of resources has long been a flashpoint for war, nowadays the focal point of conflict is the most precious resource of all: information. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. Remember to play War Thunder now on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox using the link on the screen. Upon registration, you will get a large free bonus pack that includes multiple premium vehicles, premium account, boosters, and much more. War Thunder, get it now. Thank you for watching, and Sarol.